Hello, so this is going to be a basics overview of setting up 3ds Max so that it is easier for you to navigate, move around, and a little bit more friendly, and just demystify some of the things that you can see on screen. So if I turn off this, when you open up 3ds Max, you'll get something that looks a little bit like this. You've got a top viewport, front viewport, left, and a perspective. And you can click box and you can drag out a shape, and you can press Z so that it frames up, and that's great. But there's a few things that we can do to make it a little bit easier to work with. As screen space is quite cluttered around here, what I like to do is, if we just drag this Scene Explorer off and just close it down. If you ever want it back, there's this little stacked Toggle Layer Explorer or the Scene Explorer. Sometimes it will open it up on another monitor as well, if you need either of those. And straight away, we've got a bit more screen. Another thing we can do is click a plus on any of the viewports and click Configure Viewports and change the layout to how we want it. So if we click this and click apply, now we've got this viewport, the perspective viewport, which is what we'll do most of our work in, taking up a bit more of the screen. And we can also change the size of those just by positioning the mouse so that you get those little, looks like 2 arrows. You might have something on the side of your screen here that looks a bit like the screen layouts. You should be able to just drag that off as well. I couldn't get mine back after getting rid of it, but you don't need it. Now we've got all of this space. This is another piece of user interface that we use quite often. So what I like to do is just drag it out so that we have about 2 columns on here. So now if we were to make a box and then start working with it, we've got enough space to see all of the things all at once. Okay, so let's delete that. To move around the scene in 3ds Max, you do have the cube here, which you can move around. But I prefer to use just the middle mouse to pan. And when you press the middle mouse in, and you get the little hand, and you can see it. If you're ever lost, say you've scrolled over somewhere else, you can press Z, and that should just frame you up on any viewport. If you press Z, that will usually get you back to where you want to be. So let's just put a box in here now, just so that we've got some perspective. If I were to go over here and look somewhere else, all I have to do is Z, and there we go. Okay, so that is super useful. Once you're used to panning around, if you hold down Alt on your keyboard whilst also using the middle mouse button, you can see now that we can orbit around our selection. And this orbit is based off the thing that you do have selected. So if you don't have something selected, it'll just orbit from around there. But now if I start doing that, it'll orbit from around that. Okay, so with orbit and panning, now we want to be able to move forward and backwards, and you can just do that with the zoom as well. So middle mouse with Alt to orbit, and then you can usually get wherever you need to do or wherever you need to be fairly easily. Another thing which will make your life a lot better is to go to edit, file, and scroll down to preferences here. Once you've got this open, you can see here, scene undo levels. Right now, that's on 99. Yours will be a lot lower. I would set it as high as you can get it, or, well, not as high as you can get it, but give it something like about 100 or 200, however many undos you might think that you need. With this, you'll find sometimes when working with a 3D model, maybe 10 undos isn't enough if you've been doing something for a little while and you think that you've been making a mistake. You can also see I've got some little statistics here. if we press plus and configure viewport, we should be able to go to for statistics, and you should probably want polygon count, triangle count, and total plus selection. So that means that when I click something, I can see I've got 12 triangles, which also is 12 polys. And if we get this, you can see, there we go. It's telling us how many polygons and triangles there are in this mesh. You have your snaps toggle, so that you can snap your shapes. You have your angle snaps toggle, so that you can change your rotation, which moves us nicely onto moving things around the scene. So with W, E and R. With W we have a Z, a Y and an X axis. They move in 3D space respectively. You can also right click these to zero out an object. So 0, 0, 0 is where the origin of this shape is now. If I press E, I can rotate along the Z axis. Green one is the Y axis, and the red one is the X axis. And again, if we don't like the rotation, we can just reset it there. And finally, we have scale on the X, Y, and Z. I would recommend never scaling out it like this. We'll scale and once we're in something called a sub-object mode. So if we Control Z that, and once we convert this to an editable poly, so we right click the mesh, convert to editable poly. Now, if we want to scale this mesh up, we do it like this. And although it looks like we're doing the same thing, I can promise you once it actually comes to getting this inside of a game engine, you will have a lot less issues. It's just one of the funny ways that 3ds Max works. Now that we're in an editable polygon, I can go over vertices. So verts are these points on a mesh, so where an edge ends, and you can move these around to change the shape of a mesh. Edges are at the end of faces or borders, and again you can move these around. So if I were to grab this and move it along the Z axis, again it moves. Borders are when we have holes, so if we select the borders and try to find one, there are none right now. But if we select the face and were to delete this, we now have a mesh with a hole in it, and if we select that, this is the border. And finally we have element, which is a group of faces within a editable poly, which is important because these are all attached by at least a vertex somewhere. If I were to grab one of these faces and pull it off and clone it, and then pull that out, I can now select that piece of floating geometry with element mode and that, even though they are one object. So those are some of the key things to understand about 3ds Max, how to move around, and the difference between vertex, edge, borders, polygons, and elements.